participate and give us the resources we need to keep the project moving forward. Like, how often are you guys out trying to chase these guys out here on behalf of these guys? That's not your job. That's their job. But they set these projects up poorly, and then they make you go chase around to try and get them to engage. And I've worked a lot in this space, right? Because CPQ, for a lot of stuff that we did, it's high-end manufacturing, it's medical device, it's forklifts, it's hydraulic hose pipes. It's like, my goodness, the stuff that we've worked on, right? It's gas-filled light bulbs. It's like all sorts of stuff that gets made in these factories. And so, when you go out to these factories, it's pretty amazing because it's there's nobody there. There's like one guy that owns it and a whole bunch of people doing work. And so, they're busy. They don't want to spend time telling you what their requirements are because they're trying to build forklifts. So the reality is we've got to get out there and get corporate to get their divisions aligned and to get them engaged. And that's really what's happening in this entire setup. Doesn't really matter how well Jenny was at actually managing the project. The likelihood is that because of the fact this was a corporate IT project that the divisions never even asked for, then it reeks of the kind of project failures that we see in the industry. Now, it doesn't mean that all these things we couldn't have done to try and make them better, right? So good identification there, Jenny and team. All right, group 2, which is Ali, David, JT, Camille, and Zdenek. What did you guys come up with?
I think a similar thing. We were talking a little bit about also the, what done looks like is not just the solution. It's also, for example, the timeline and milestones. That sort of thing.
Well, it is the triple constraints, right? So what does done look like? It's a certain amount of scope within a certain amount of time due to a certain amount of effort, right? To a certain level of quality, right? That's what done is. And so the more it changes, the question becomes, who suffers the impact? So in this particular case study, what the service provider is not very good at is making sure that when these things change, right? So let's say something needs more effort. They're not very good at making sure that that impact, which is the change in effort, is actually felt by the customer. And instead, they assume the impact or absorb the impact of every change to the triple constraints. Now, that's what happens when we do projects passively. And the general idea here is that we have to elevate our level of effort so that we focus on doing things proactively, which means, there's a change in the triple constraints. What we haven't worked out, client, is who's being impacted. And this is what I think is very interesting. It doesn't mean that we're out there forcing the customer to absorb every impact. You know what? We will absorb impact. We love the customer and we will invest in them. We just can't invest in every customer all the bleeding time. So we have to work out which customers will we invest in which circumstances and when do we need to say no. And we don't get that option if we're not escalating the changes. If we're not capturing them in proactive mode and saying, whoa, we can't go down this path because we haven't worked it out. It's not a part of the journey. Who's going to pay for this part? Who's going to pay for the fact that now we're going to have a deviation? And it might be okay if we agree to do it. It might be okay if we escalate this and JT says, look, let's just go make him happy. Because that's JT's choice across the portfolio or whoever owns the portfolio, right? But they have to be given the choice as to what it is we're going to do. Sometimes we're going to go back and say to the customer, no dice, I can't absorb it. If we're going to do this, you have to pay for it. But ideally, we get the customer to pay for the things that we proactively identify. And when we don't, what happens is we find it very hard not to be held accountable for it because we've become complicit in the fact that the problem exists. And that's why it becomes very difficult to negotiate your way out of a bad project the further you get into it. Because you've become complicit in why that project is so messed up. And the customer's disappointed because they haven't been led. They're disappointed because they didn't get value for money. They're disappointed because they're not getting the functions they wanted. They're disappointed for all sorts of reasons. But they might have been the major reason why this project is actually off the tracks. But once you become complicit to it, it's very hard to unwind yourself from it. And in fact, it's so difficult that when these things go to court, it's very, very hard for the law to even intervene in these situations. Usually it's the customer trying to sue the service provider, but usually the law says, hey, look, I get it. They were terrible, but what were you doing? Why did you put it into production? Why did it cause all this damage? Why did you leave it there? Why didn't you back it out? This is your production environment, not theirs. So why are you claiming damages against them? Did they mislead you? Did you not test it? Isn't that your responsibility? And that's why lawsuits against service providers typically don't go anywhere, right? Usually they settle and the customer gets some money back and then everybody's good. But the reality is the courts find it really, really difficult to, assign full blame to the service provider because of those nuances, right? It's two companies agreeing to go do something. And what we tend to do is to forget about that because that's the way that our sales team likes it. It's the way the customer likes it. It's easier just to say, the services team has to deliver. And so we fall into that mindset, right? What sales and the customer do is they just simplify the problem because it's easier for them to simplify the problem. Services needs to deliver, end of story. Because you guys are the experts, right? So that's how they look at it. But the reality is it's not that straightforward. It's actually quite complex. Make sense? But that's why we have to elevate our game, right? Because if we don't do that, then we kind of allow ourselves to conform to everybody else's version of what professional services is. And that version of professional services is simplified and to their benefit, not ours.
Yeah, that makes sense. Think of a side question if I have time. But sometimes we sign contracts that are the customer's paper, right? So they're kind of saying, like, this is how we want things run. I don't know if you have anything to say about that situation. We don't do it very often, but it does happen at times.
Yeah, and you'll do it. I mean, I do it, right? I can't remember what we did for you guys. I think we signed on my paper, but I'm doing a project now with a very large software company, and they insist upon using their contracts, and so we kind of say, look, we're happy to do it. It's more work on our side now, right? But it's more work on your side to get it reviewed if it's ours. What I say is, if you're prepared for me to carve up your contract, because our contract is specifically designed to match the service that we deliver, which is training service, right? So the example that we'll use is that IP in a training service remains with me. You don't get any, right? It's a training service. You didn't ask me to build this for you custom. It's my IP. We're going to train you on it. I own it, period, end of story. And your stock standard contract is going to say, oh, it's a service. So anything, that you create, you own, or anything that we consume, we own. And that's not true. And so, in some situations, their contract is already predefined to say things, any new things created are ours and so on. So you've got to get into it. But usually, in some instances, the customer says, okay, no, I get it. We'll use yours, right? But it's usually not a big enough deterrent. And even when we're doing Cirrus One, one client, large hydraulics hose manufacturer that makes assemblies for oil rigs, we ended up having to use their contracts. Their procurement was like a total pain. You just got to have your radar on, and you got to make sure that people who are reviewing the contracts know what they're doing. That's probably what I would say. I don't think you're ever going to get away from having to do work under another customer's contracts. You just have to make sure that you've got good legal people who know how to review them, right? I mean, one of the things I'll always be thankful for my time at IBM is that I pretty much am a contracts manager, because of the amount of time I spent with the legal team at IBM actually dealing with the law. And I can actually now deal with the law in like multiple countries all around the world because that's just what they trained me to do. So I'm very grateful for it because I don't need a lot of legal support. But if you inside your organization, you're going to need legal support. Does that make sense? Was I answering the question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Group 3, which was, see, why can't I see it? Group 3 was Amir, Yaroslav, Rich, and Srikanth.
Yeah, so we kind of saw the similar things that everyone else has said. I think maybe an overly simplistic observation, but in my view, quite a fundamental one, especially on the themes of making sure the definition of done is a mutually agreed thing, is establishing it clearly at the kickoff. I think at the in the case study, it's very clear that they talk about the vendor presented a timeline, the vendor presented the expectations of the team, and it's very much presenting at the client, but going back to that level of engagement and making sure that we're setting the scene from the beginning of, look, we need a North Star, we need a definition of done, this is the deliverables, this is what it's going to be, and this is how we're going to get there. If you don't have that from the beginning, then already trying to insert that later through the project becomes more challenging.
Yeah.
So
Rich, who had the North Star at kickoff?
Well, I think it's missing. I think, if I'm honest, it's not clearly articulated.
Who does have the North Star when we get to kickoff?
It should be the vendor, right? This is how we get the experts. Well, it depends. I mean, if you define the North Star as the reason for doing the project, then it's going to be the client, right? And that's
right.
This case, yeah.
But who in the client is going to be the one that has that North Star? The project team or somebody else?
Yeah, the exec sponsor.
Yeah. And this is a really big issue. And again, it's one of the reasons why this project was never going to be successful, right? We talked about this before when we were doing the skill steps, right? The exec sponsor has been working with our team for what, 6, 9, 12 months, right? They have spent, and of course, that's how long they've been working with our team. They probably worked on this for 3 months to build the business case before that, right? So this person has been developing, right, an image of what this thing is going to do for probably close to 12 months. And that's probably not a joke, right? So by the time you guys get there, the executive sponsor has been dreaming up how they're going to build their next career development step by implementing this solution. Just think about that for a minute, right? This person's career is going to be impacted by how this solution gets developed. Now, their vision for the project is the only North Star we have at this point. It's the only North Star that is worth knowing at kickoff. But yet they don't attend. And they don't attend because they think their job is done. Now, Rich made a very astute observation. If we don't know that North Star as we get into the project at kickoff, how the heck are you going to re-inject it when the project is already off moving in a different direction? It's really, really difficult, and it's going to come at a cost, right? So here's the problem we've got. The North Star concept is actually a great concept, right? I just don't know if it translates everywhere, but I think that the North Star is a great concept, which is somebody's got to have it. It's always the executive sponsor because they're the person that have been doing it the longest. The last people that get involved in a project are the project team, right? They're the last people at the customer site that actually get involved in the project. Yet that's who we're talking to. We're talking to the people that have an imperfect copy of what the exec sponsor is trying to do. And they're going to keep making it up because they have no idea why the exec sponsor is doing this. The exec sponsor might be doing this because under the covers, we're going to make another acquisition. Because what we're going to do, we're going to lay off 300 people so that we don't need this division at all. What we're going to do is we're going to go out and release a new product in the future that really needs this particular workflow, right? No idea at the project team level. That's why we don't listen to them, right? We listen, we process it, and then we confirm with the sponsor. That's the way that projects go. The project sponsor is the one with the value. So because the project sponsor did not attend kickoff, we kick off in the wrong direction. No North Star, or a North Star that's not the North Star. It's actually the East Star. So we're heading off in the wrong direction. And then what happens? We come back and we show it to the executive sponsor. What do they say? That's not what I wanted. Now, who's at fault? Right? They're at fault for not getting engaged, but we're at fault for becoming complicit to the fact that we never went back to the executive sponsor to say, hey, I'm meant to be building what you want. That's why we have to escalate. Now, I'll give you an example here. We had a great situation with this just to explain how difficult this actually is. One of the things we did at Cirrus One clearly was we engaged our executive sponsors on all projects, right? That was a thing that we did across all projects. So we had a massive project. I can't remember how much it was. I actually just saw it yesterday because I was looking at the SOW as an example. It was an $800,000 project, okay? So it's an $800,000 project. We ensure we have a sponsor, right? This guy stands up. He's like, I am the sponsor. Great, we've got him. He's super excited about the project. He's actively engaged. He gives us guidance all the way through. During the process of the project, that guy gets a boss, right? His boss. He wasn't the sponsor, but now it's that guy's boss. So this guy comes in from another organization that has already failed at implementing CPQ. So he now has a vision of what he wants as the North Star for the project. We're already in testing. He comes down, new to the company, has a look at what this guy has commissioned to be built, and he says, that's not what we want here. Who's at fault? $300,000 in changes is what they needed on top of their $800,000 project. Now, we sat down and we had this conversation with them, and I was very clear this was not our fault. I was very clear that we have lots of other projects we should be going to do, and I can't really give you a discount because you decided that you were going to change your sponsors halfway through the project. So they ended up paying for the whole thing. And they still ended up loving us, I mean, because it wasn't our fault. And they understood that if I give them a discount on a $300,000 piece of work, then that's $50,000 that I'm not getting doing $300,000 worth of work somewhere else. But that's what can happen when sponsors change in the middle of a project. And that's why we say that a change in sponsor is the most risky event that can happen to the success of any project. So when it does happen, we have to make sure we're on top of it. And you can actually say that that was a failing on our part. I'm not sure if we knew that this guy came in or not. But the minute that he said, hey, I've got a new boss, we should have been on it, right? Hey, maybe we should get that person onto the project and see what happens. Because you've got to start to identify that these changes in the customer environment are going to start derailing your project, because now a different version of done is going to get overlaid on top of what they already have. So guys, great conversation. I really love it. I love the questions, right? I love the, hey, what ifs? What if we're doing this and it's this way or that way because you didn't cover that? That's the stuff that we want to talk about. We want to think about the experiences that you've had on projects and bring those up as questions, because I don't know it all. I don't know what you've been through. I can't cover every single scenario because they're infinite, right? So keep bringing up your questions. This was great today, right? Keep doing that. I absolutely love it. And as you'll see, sometimes I have an answer, sometimes I don't have an answer, right? It's just, that's the way it's going to be, and we're going to have to live with it and try to minimize it as much as we can. Other than that, please, please, please do your skill steps, right? It really does help to be doing this. Now, you're going to give us feedback as you do them. If you don't like doing them, just tell us. Do them and tell us you don't like it. That will actually help us look at it as the data and work out what we're going to do about it. But for the most part, these things have been done by lots of consultants all around the globe. They're deliberately designed to help you develop the skill set, right? To help develop the skill. Other than that, keep doing the one-on-ones like JT talked about. Everybody's been using them, which I think is great. do a one-on-one with your manager, use the tool, start tracking them, start using them for what it's for. It's actually a phenomenal tool from a manager's perspective to be able to do all this in one place, help somebody develop a skill and help them get engaged with their organization. Other than that, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time. Take care.
Thanks, Shane.
Thanks, Shane.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone.